The transport ship moved through deep space without sound, but inside it felt heavy and tense. It was a prison carrier of the Carthan Empire, built to move the worst criminals across star systems. Cold white lights ran along the metal walls, and armed guards stood at every corner. No one spoke loudly. Even the soldiers kept their voices low, as if the ship itself was listening. In the center section of the lower deck, there was a long row of seats bolted to the floor. Every seat was filled. Except one. That single empty seat looked normal. Same metal frame, same safety lock, same thin cushion. But no one went near it. Even the guards kept a distance of at least 10 steps from it. Around that seat, the air felt different. Colder. Heavier. And in the seat next to the empty one, chained with glowing restraints around her wrists, sat the alien woman everyone feared. Her name was Violara. Once she had commanded fleets. Once she had led invasions. Now she sat alone like a shadow no one wanted to touch. Her skin was pale silver, marked with dark lines that moved faintly under the surface like living scars. Her eyes were deep violet, almost black, and they did not blink often. She did not move much. She did not speak. She only watched. Above her seat, a red warning symbol blinked slowly. Containment level black. The highest danger rating in the Empire. Some said she destroyed an entire battle fleet by herself. Some said she killed her own commanding officer in the middle of war. Others whispered that she could enter mines and break them without lifting a finger. No one knew the full truth. What everyone knew was simple. She was punishment made flesh. And she was being punished in return. Isolation was her sentence. No one was allowed to speak to her. No one was allowed to sit next to her. The empty seat was not a mistake. It was part of the punishment. A reminder that she was no longer one of them. The ship doors opened at the final docking station before hyperspace jump. A late passenger stepped inside. He was human. Tall, average build, dark jacket, no armor, no weapons visible. Humans were new to galactic travel. They were not considered powerful. Not psychic. Not physically superior. Just persistent. The human looked around calmly. The upper rows were full. The middle rows were full. The lower rows were full. Only one seat was empty. The guards stiffened when they saw him walking toward the lower section. One guard stepped forward, then hesitated. Protocol rules glowed on his wrist screen. The seat was available. No restriction listed for species. They could not legally block him without explanation. And explaining meant speaking her name out loud. No one wanted that. The human reached the row. He stopped beside the empty seat. He glanced at Violara for a brief second. Her eyes shifted toward him slowly. The entire lower deck seemed to freeze. A soldier dropped a metal tool somewhere in the distance. No one bent to pick it up. The human gave a small nod, almost polite. Then he sat down. The metal clicked as the seat locked him in place. A soft gasp moved through the guards. Violara did not move at first. Her head remained forward. Then slowly, very slowly, she turned toward him. Her chains gave a faint hum as she shifted. Her eyes studied his face carefully. He did not look afraid. He did not avoid her gaze. He simply looked back at her as if she were just another traveler. Seconds passed. Then a minute. No psychic pressure burst through the air. No alarms sounded. No blood spilled. The human leaned back slightly and adjusted his jacket. "Long trip," he said quietly. It was not a question. It was not a challenge. Just a simple comment. Violara's lips curved slightly. It was not a friendly smile. It was something sharper, something curious. Her voice came out calm and smooth. "They finally sent someone interesting," she said. The guards looked at each other in fear. The human tilted his head a little. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. For the first time in years, a faint laugh escaped her. It was soft, but it carried across the metal walls like a crack in glass. The transport ship engines began to charge for hyperspace jump. Blue light filled the windows. And for the first time since her punishment began, Violara was not alone. If you want to see what happens next between the most feared alien in the Empire and the calm human who chose to sit beside her, gently consider subscribing to this channel so you do not miss the next part of this story. The hyperspace jump began with a deep vibration that moved through the floor and into every seat. Blue light stretched across the windows until the stars outside turned into long burning lines. Inside the transport ship, silence returned. But it was no longer the same silence as before. Now it carried tension. Every guard kept glancing toward the lower deck. Toward the human. Toward her. Violara did not look at him for several minutes. She stared forward as if nothing had changed. But her senses were sharp. She could feel his heartbeat. Steady. Calm. Not forced. Not pretending. That alone confused her more than fear would have. Most beings who came near her had racing hearts and shaking hands. This human's pulse was slow, almost bored. The chains around her wrists glowed faintly as the ship entered full hyperspace speed. They were not simple metal restraints. They were neural dampeners. Designed to block her psychic field. Without them, she could press into minds like a blade through thin fabric. But even restrained, her presence felt heavy. The human shifted slightly in his seat. "You are staring at the jump field too hard," he said quietly. "It makes some people dizzy." Her eyes moved toward him again. "You speak as if I am fragile," she replied. He shrugged gently. "I speak as if you have been sitting alone for a long time." That sentence landed differently. Not as an insult. Not as mockery. But as observation. Across the deck, two officers stood near a control panel and whispered urgently. "She disobeyed direct command," one of them said under his breath. "She abandoned the strike order on Kelian Prime," the other replied. "She let the human colony escape." The first officer shook his head. "High Command called it betrayal. High Command called it weakness." Violara heard every word. Her hearing was sharper than theirs. She remembered that day clearly. The order had been simple. Destroy the colony. No survivors. It was meant to send a message to the growing human systems. She had watched the planet through her command window. She had seen small lights across the surface. Homes. Cities. Children running through narrow streets. And she hesitated. For 3 seconds she hesitated. 3 seconds that changed everything. Instead of firing the fleet cannons, she ordered a withdrawal. She told High Command the target had defensive traps. She lied. The truth was more dangerous. She could not see an enemy in civilians. When her commander confronted her in private, she admitted it. She said the order was dishonorable. He called her infected by weakness. Their argument lasted less than a minute. The official report later said he died during a system malfunction. No one proved anything. But no one forgot either. Her punishment was not execution. Execution would have been simple. Her punishment was isolation. Public disgrace. A living example of what mercy costs. Every officer was told her name. Every soldier warned never to speak to her. The empty seat beside her was symbolic. A reminder that compassion leads to loneliness. The human listened quietly to the whispers. He understood enough of the galactic language to follow the meaning. He leaned slightly toward her. "So you saved them," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "I disobeyed," she corrected. "Sometimes that is the same thing," he replied calmly. She studied his face more closely now. "You are not military," she said. "No." "Then why are you on a prison carrier?" "I requested transfer. To sit beside me." "Yes." The answer came too easily. That unsettled her more than hostility would have. Across the ship, a low alarm blinked briefly and then disappeared. A minor system fluctuation. But the guards tensed instantly. They were trained to expect chaos around her. Vayalara slowly extended her psychic senses despite the dampeners. Just a small push. A ripple of pressure toward the human's mind. It was a test. Most beings would flinch. Some would scream. His eyes flickered for half a second. Then steadied. He turned his head toward her calmly. "You can try harder if you want," he said softly. She stopped immediately. Not because she was exhausted, but because she felt something unexpected. His mind was not shielded. It was structured. Layered with discipline. Pain. Memory. Loss. And something stronger than psychic resistance. Choice. He was not unbreakable. He simply refused to bend. "You are strange," she said quietly. He gave a faint smile. Humans usually are. The ship lights flickered once. Longer this time. A faint tremor moved through the walls. The officers near the control panel went silent. Vayalara's eyes shifted toward the ceiling. That was not a normal fluctuation. The hyperspace field hummed unevenly for 1 second. Then returned to normal. But she felt it. A disturbance in the energy outside the ship. Something following them. Watching. She turned slowly back toward the human. "You chose a dangerous seat," she said. He nodded slightly. "I know." Her voice dropped lower. "This punishment was meant to break me," she said. "They wanted the galaxy to see what happens to those who show mercy." "And did it break you?" he asked. For the first time since she boarded the ship, there was a pause in her certainty. "No," she said. The lights flickered again. This time the tremor was stronger. Far in the distance, something hit the outer hull like a distant hammer strike. The guards grabbed their weapons instantly. Red warning lights began to glow along the corridor. Vayalara did not look afraid. But her eyes sharpened. The punishment was about to become something else entirely. Red lights washed over the metal walls as the alarm grew louder. The hyperspace hum became unstable, like a machine breathing too fast. Guards rushed past the lower deck, shouting orders into their wrist communicators. The officers near the control panel no longer whispered. They argued openly now. "Unidentified mass in the jump corridor," one of them said. "That is impossible," another replied. "Nothing tracks inside hyperspace." Vayalara listened carefully. Her senses stretched outward again despite the dampeners pressing against her mind. There was something there. Not debris. Not random distortion. It felt deliberate. Like a predator pacing just beyond sight. The human beside her remained seated. His hands rested calmly on his knees. He watched the chaos without panic. "You knew this would happen," Vayalara said quietly. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. He did not answer at first. He waited until another heavy tremor moved through the ship. Then he spoke softly. "I knew something would." Her eyes narrowed. "You requested transfer onto a prison carrier that holds me," she said. "You sat in the one seat everyone avoids. You are not surprised by the attack. Humans are not considered powerful," she continued. "Yet you sit here like you are watching weather change." He turned slightly toward her. "In our history," he said, "we learned something very early. When everyone tells you that you are weak, you survive by understanding fear better than they do." Another impact struck the hull, stronger this time. The lights flickered violently. Somewhere above them, metal screamed as it twisted. Vayalara could feel the guard's fear rising like heat. It pulsed through the deck in waves. "You are not psychic," she said. "No. You have no energy field. No. You are physically average compared to most species in this empire." That sounds accurate, he replied calmly. Then why are humans still alive, she asked. Her tone carried real curiosity now. Why have your colonies survived 3 border raids? Why do your systems rebuild faster than expected? He looked forward again. Because we do not measure strength the same way you do. Another alarm joined the first. A deeper tone. Structural warning. Violara felt the hyperspace corridor destabilizing around them. Something was forcing them toward normal space. We do not have psychic power, the human continued. We do not have the biggest fleets. But we have memory. And we have stubbornness. A violent jolt threw sparks from a nearby panel. Several guards fell to one knee. Emergency shields activated across the deck. The ship dropped out of hyperspace abruptly. Stars exploded back into view beyond the windows. But they were wrong. They were too close. Too distorted. An enormous shadow moved across the starlight. Violara felt it clearly now. A war vessel. Unknown design. Larger than anything in the Carthan fleet. And it had been waiting for them. The officers' voices rose in panic. External weapons charging. Shield levels dropping. Signal origin unidentified. Violara turned back to the human slowly. You brought this, she said. He did not deny it immediately. He watched the massive enemy ship rotate outside, its surface lined with dark energy nodes. No, he said finally. But I suspected someone would try. You are bait, she realized. Her violet eyes sharpened with new understanding. My punishment is public, she continued. My transfer would be tracked. An enemy could see opportunity. He nodded once. Empires create enemies faster than they realize. Another blast struck the transport ship. This time the lower deck lights went out completely. Only red emergency strips glowed along the floor. The restraints around Violara flickered weakly. Not fully deactivated. But unstable. You are very calm for prey, she said quietly. He looked at her again. Humans have a rule, he replied. When something hunts us, we learn how it hunts. And then we hunt it back. Her chains hummed louder as the power grid fluctuated. She tested the dampeners carefully. There was weakness now. Small cracks in the suppression field. You came here knowing the ship might be attacked, she said. Yes. And you chose to sit beside me. Yes. Why? For the first time, his expression shifted slightly. Not fear. Not arrogance. Something deeper. Because you are not what they say you are, he answered. Outside, the unknown warship fired again. A direct hit tore through the transport's outer shield. Metal buckled somewhere above. The entire vessel shook violently. Screams echoed down the corridor. Violara could feel the crew's panic spiraling. She could also feel something else. The enemy vessel carried psychic signatures. Multiple minds linked together. Cold, disciplined, aggressive. They are not random raiders, she said. They are organized. Good, the human replied softly. Organized enemies make predictable mistakes. She stared at him. You speak like a commander. I am not, he said. But humans study war very carefully. A section of ceiling plating fell nearby. Guards scrambled to evacuate upper decks. The transport ship began to rotate slowly, trying to align defensive cannons. Its weapons were small compared to the shadow outside. You are not afraid of dying, she said quietly. He paused for half a second. Of course I am, he replied. I just don't let it decide for me. Her restraints sparked again. One side dimmed almost completely. Through the chaos, she sensed something else. The enemy ship was preparing a boarding maneuver. She could feel the psychic minds focusing inward. Locking onto her. They are not here for the transport, she said slowly. They are here for me. The human's eyes did not widen. He had already guessed. That makes things simpler, he said. Simpler, she repeated, almost amused despite the destruction around them. Yes, he continued calmly. If they want you, then we know where they will come from. Another massive impact hit the hull. This time a breach alarm screamed through the lower deck. Emergency bulkheads began sliding into place. Violara felt the final dampening lock weaken further. Her power pressing against thin resistance now. The human leaned slightly closer to her in the flickering red light. Tell me something, he said. If they free you, will you destroy everything? Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. The question hung between them like a blade. Outside, the enemy warship moved into boarding range. And inside the failing prison carrier, the most feared woman in the Empire felt her chains beginning to fail. The breach alarm did not stop. It became part of the air. A sharp screaming sound that cut through every thought. Metal groaned somewhere deep inside the ship as the first boarding spike punched through the outer hull. Violara felt it like a needle sliding into flesh. Not through her body, but through the mind of the ship itself. The Carthan transport had basic AI systems. She could sense its panic as clearly as she sensed the crew's. The human did not look toward the breach. He looked at her. He was still waiting for her answer. If they free you, will you destroy everything? He repeated calmly. Another violent tremor threw sparks across the ceiling. Smoke began to curl along the corridor. Violara's restraints flickered again. One cuff went dark completely. Her left hand was free. She flexed her fingers slowly. The air around them seemed to tighten. Guards who were running past the lower deck suddenly slowed. Some of them staggered as if pressure pushed against their skulls. Violara could feel her power returning in thin waves. Not full strength, but enough. You still fear me more than the enemy outside, she said quietly. The human did not deny it. I don't fear you, he said. I fear what pain does to people. That sentence struck deeper than any psychic probe. For a brief second, something inside her shifted. Another boarding spike tore into the hull, closer this time. The deck shook violently. Emergency bulkheads sealed off upper corridors with heavy crashes. The transport ship's small defense cannons fired blindly into space. Outside the window, the massive shadow vessel glowed with dark energy shields. It absorbed the weak counterfire without slowing. Violara extended her senses outward carefully. Through metal. Through vacuum. Toward the enemy ship. She felt them clearly now. Not one mind. Not even 10. But dozens. Linked together in controlled psychic synchronization. Cold, disciplined, ruthless. They were not pirates. They were hunters. They are called the Virex, she said slowly. The human listened carefully. They operate beyond imperial borders, she continued. They do not conquer. They collect. Collect what? He asked. Weapons, she replied. Another explosion ripped through the upper level. Fragments of ceiling plating crashed down 2 rows ahead of them. Screams echoed again. Smoke thickened. The Virex ship began releasing smaller assault pods. Sharp black shapes cutting through vacuum toward the transport's exposed sections. They want me, Violara said quietly. To them, I am not a traitor. I am an asset. The human's jaw tightened slightly. Because of what you can do, he said. Yes. Her second restraint flickered violently now. The suppression field around her mind weakened further. She felt power rising like heat beneath her skin. It would not take much more to break free completely. Through the corridor ahead, the first boarding pod breached the inner wall. Metal folded inward with a violent screech. Dark armored figures stepped through the smoke. Tall, thin, wearing black exosuits that pulsed faintly with psychic amplifiers. Their helmets were smooth and faceless. Each one carried a compact energy weapon glowing deep blue. Guards fired immediately. Bright plasma bolts lit the corridor. 2 Virex soldiers fell. But the others moved with frightening coordination. Their minds linked, predicting angles before shots were fired. Within seconds, 3 Carthan guards collapsed. The lower deck was now a battlefield. Passengers screamed and tried to unbuckle themselves. Emergency locks refused to release. Violara stood slowly. Her right restraint snapped open with a sharp burst of sparks. The final dampener collar at her neck flickered violently. The human stood as well. He did not run. He did not hide. He positioned himself slightly in front of her. "You are still restrained," he said quietly. For a few seconds, she replied. A Virex soldier turned its smooth helmet toward them. It clearly recognized her. Its psychic field flared with excitement. 2 others shifted formation, advancing directly toward her row. "They will try to isolate me," she said calmly. "Cut me off from the rest of the ship." "Can you stop them?" the human asked. "Yes," she answered honestly. "But it will not be gentle." The collar around her neck sparked again. Cracks of energy crawled across its surface. The human stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice even as chaos erupted around them. "Listen carefully," he said. "If you destroy this ship, the Empire will say they were right about you. If you save it, they will not know what to say." Another Virex blast tore through a nearby seat. Metal shards flew past them. Violara's eyes glowed brighter now. The collar finally shattered with a sharp metallic snap. The pressure in the air changed instantly. It felt like gravity had increased by 1 degree. Every mind on the deck felt her return. The Virex soldiers hesitated. For the first time since boarding. Their formation wavered. Violara lifted one hand slowly. The smoke in the corridor began to swirl unnaturally. Invisible force gripping it, shaping it. She could crush their minds in seconds. Tear their neural links apart. Turn their own psychic network against them. The human watched her carefully. He did not try to stop her. He only said one thing. "Show them who you really are." Another wave of Virex soldiers breached from the side corridor. More than before. Heavily armed. Clearly prepared for resistance. Violara's power expanded outward like a storm breaking free of chains. The metal walls trembled as if reacting to her presence. The Virex minds pressed against hers in defense. A psychic clash began silently, violently, invisibly. Passengers froze as pressure filled their skulls. Some guards collapsed unconscious from the shockwave of mental force alone. Outside the ship, the massive Virex war vessel adjusted position, preparing to tractor the damaged transport fully into its docking hold. "They will not stop with this ship," Violara said calmly amid the chaos. "They will follow the Empire to its core systems." The human's eyes shifted briefly toward the window, then back to her. "Then we stop them here," he replied. The hidden threat was no longer hidden. It stood inside the ship. And it waited outside in the dark. But for the first time since her punishment began, Violara was no longer alone in facing it. The air felt like it was vibrating. Not from explosions now, but from her power fully awake. Violara stood in the center of the lower deck as if gravity itself had shifted around her. The Virex soldiers locked their formation again, their psychic network tightening like a shield wall. They had prepared for her strength. They had studied her. But they had expected rage. They had expected chaos. They had expected a weapon without restraint. What they did not expect was hesitation. The human stepped forward into the red flashing light, placing himself slightly ahead of her once more. He did not carry a rifle. He did not have armor. He only had a small wrist device glowing faintly with tactical interface data. "Do not overextend," he said calmly. She looked at him sharply. "You think you command me?" she asked. "No," he answered quietly. "I think you want control." Another blast shook the corridor as more Virex forces pushed inward from the breach point. The Carthan guards were falling back, disorganized. They had never trained to fight enemies with synchronized minds. Every shot they fired was predicted. Every movement countered. Violara felt the Virex psychic net pressing against her like cold metal. They were probing her thoughts carefully. Testing her reaction speed. Looking for emotional instability. Looking for anger. Looking for weakness. She could destroy them. But if she unleashed everything at once, the shock would tear through the transport ship as well. The human raised his wrist slightly. A small holographic grid projected into the smoky air. He had accessed the ship's defense layout. 3 more boarding clusters on the upper level, he said calmly. They are dividing the crew. Trying to isolate the command bridge. Violara closed her eyes briefly, extending her awareness upward through the ship's structure. He was right. The Virex were not attacking blindly. They were hurting. Cutting off escape routes. Preparing to capture her once the transport collapsed. You knew they would use this pattern, she said. He nodded slightly. Predators repeat successful behavior. Another wave of Virex advanced down the corridor. Their weapons glowing brighter. They began firing in coordinated bursts, driving the remaining guards into cover. Violara lifted her hand. This time her power did not explode outward. It narrowed. Focused. Precise. She struck directly at the lead Virex soldier's neural link. Instead of crushing the mind, she disrupted the connection. A small fracture in the synchronized network. The soldier froze mid-step. Its movements suddenly delayed. The others behind it faltered for half a second. The human saw it instantly. Now, he said. He grabbed a fallen Carthan rifle from the floor. He did not fire wildly. He aimed at the exposed joints in the Virex armor, targeting the hesitation she had created. 2 precise shots. 2 Virex soldiers dropped. Their psychic link flickered violently. Violara widened the fracture. Not breaking the minds. Only severing their shared awareness. Without coordination. The Virex were still strong, but no longer flawless. The guards regained momentum, returning fire with renewed confidence. The corridor became chaos again. But controlled chaos. The human moved forward methodically. Never rushing. Never panicking. He positioned the guards where the Virex blind spots would form, using her psychic disruptions like openings in armor. She watched him carefully between strikes. He was not leading with authority. He was guiding with understanding. He trusted her timing. And she began trusting his. Another explosion rocked the ship as the massive Virex war vessel locked tractor beams onto the damaged hull. The transport groaned under the pull. They are preparing extraction, she said sharply. They will rip the ship apart if needed. Then we give them something else to calculate, he replied. He tapped rapidly on his wrist interface, redirecting internal power from non-essential systems. Lighting dimmed across the lower decks. Life support dropped to minimal settings. But defense systems flared brighter. He was starving comfort to feed survival. The Virex paused again. Their network recalculating the shift in energy distribution. Violara felt the ripple of confusion. They cannot read you fully, she observed. He gave a faint smile. Humans are difficult to predict. She reached outward once more. But this time she did not aim at the soldiers. She aimed through them. Toward the larger war vessel outside. Toward the psychic core controlling the assault. It was stronger than the boarding teams. A central mind coordinating all units. Cold, ancient, patient. It felt her presence immediately. And pushed back. A silent psychic duel began across vacuum and steel. The human noticed the shift in her breathing. Too much, he warned quietly. It is necessary, she answered. The Virex central mind tried to pierce her thoughts. To flood her with isolation. With images of betrayal. Of her trial. Of her exile. Of the empty seat. It tried to break her will through memory. Her knees trembled slightly. For 1 second. The human stepped closer without hesitation. He placed his hand firmly on her shoulder. Not to control her. Not to restrain her. But to anchor her. You are not alone now, he said calmly. The words cut through the psychic assault like light through smoke. Her power stabilized instantly. The Virex central mind faltered. And used to resistance reinforced by emotional certainty. Violara pushed back with controlled force. Not destruction. But disruption. She severed the link between the war vessel and its boarding units. Across the corridors. Virex soldiers suddenly moved independently. Their perfect synchronization shattered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. The Carthan guards pressed the advantage, driving them backward toward the breach points. Outside, the massive Virex ship shifted erratically as its coordination collapsed. The tractor beam flickered. Then failed. The human lowered the rifle slowly, watching the enemy retreat toward their assault pods. They did not expect cooperation, he said quietly. Violara looked at him carefully. They expected a weapon, she replied. And what are you? He asked. She paused, looking at the fallen Virex soldiers, at the surviving guards, at the damaged but intact ship. Then back at him. For the first time, she said softly, I am not a weapon. The last Virex assault pod detached from the hull in silence. It did not flee in panic. It withdrew with cold calculation. The massive war vessel outside adjusted its damaged shields, then slowly turned away from the transport ship. No final blast. No dramatic explosion. Just a silent retreat into the darkness between stars. Inside the Carthan transport, smoke drifted through broken corridors. Emergency lights blinked weakly across scarred metal walls. The screams had stopped. Now there were only quiet voices. Medics moving carefully. Officers speaking in controlled tones. Trying to sound confident again. Violara stood still in the center of the lower deck. Her power had lowered to a calm field around her. Not gone. But controlled. The human stepped back slightly, giving her space. The guards looked at her differently now. Not with simple fear. But with uncertainty. She could feel their thoughts clearly without trying. Confusion. Relief. Disbelief. She had been free. She had been powerful. And she had not destroyed them. The transport ship's captain finally appeared at the sealed bulkhead entrance. His uniform was torn at the shoulder. A thin line of blood traced down the side of his face. He stepped onto the lower deck slowly. His eyes locked onto Violara first. Then shifted toward the human beside her. You were released, the captain said carefully. Yes, she answered. And you did not attempt escape. No. And you defended this ship. Yes. The captain turned toward his tactical officer. Confirm external scan, he ordered. Virex vessel in retreat, the officer replied. Boarding units destroyed or withdrawn. The captain's gaze returned to Violara. The silence stretched longer than comfort allowed. You disobeyed the Empire once, he said quietly. Today you saved it. Violara did not respond immediately. The human spoke instead. She did not save an empire, he said calmly. She saved the people inside the ship. Several officers glanced at him sharply, as if noticing him fully for the first time. And you are, the captain asked. Human diplomatic observer, he replied. Attached to Border Stability Review. That answer carried more weight than his simple clothing suggested.
The captain studied him carefully now. "You anticipated the Virex ambush," he said. "I considered it probable," the human replied. "You allowed this ship to be used as bait. I calculated that the Virex would expose their command structure if they believed they could capture her." The captain's jaw tightened. "That was a risk." "Yes," the human agreed calmly. "It was." Violara watched the exchange with quiet intensity. She realized something slowly. The human had not come to rescue her. He had come to test her. And perhaps to test the Empire as well. Emergency transmissions began streaming toward the capital system. Reports of the Virex attack. Reports of the transport's survival. Reports of her release and actions. Within hours, High Command would review every second of recorded footage. Every decision. Every movement. The Empire had labeled her weakness. Now the evidence showed discipline. Control. Cooperation. The captain finally spoke again. "Containment protocols are suspended," he said formally, "until High Command issues new directives." The guards hesitated before stepping closer. But this time they did not raise weapons. They simply deactivated the remaining fragments of her broken restraints. Violara flexed her wrists slowly. No chains. No dampeners. Yet she did not move aggressively. She remained where she stood. The human looked toward the cracked viewing window. Stars slowly stabilizing as the ship repaired minor systems. "The Virex will reconsider open assaults," he said quietly. "They prefer certainty." "And what will the Empire prefer?" Violara asked. He turned toward her. "That depends on whether they fear losing control more than they fear being wrong." Several hours later, a secure transmission arrived from the capital world. The command chamber appeared in holographic projection across the damaged bridge. Tall figures in ceremonial armor stood in silence, their eyes fixed on Violara. One of the high counselors stepped forward. "You were sentenced to isolation for defiance," he said. "Yet today you acted in defense of Imperial lives." "Yes," she answered calmly. "You were freed during combat." "Yes." "You possessed full capability to abandon the transport." "Yes." "And you did not." "No." The chamber fell silent again. The high counselors shifted slightly. Conflicted calculations passing between them. "The human influence is noted," one of them said carefully. The human did not interrupt. He stood quietly at the edge of the projection field. Another counselor spoke. "The Empire teaches that mercy breeds weakness." Violara held their gaze steadily. "Today mercy preserved strength," she replied. The words echoed across the bridge like controlled thunder. For the first time in many cycles, the high counselors did not immediately counter her. They had seen the recordings. They had seen her power restrained, directed, disciplined. Finally, the lead counselor spoke again. "Your punishment is under review," he said formally. "Further judgment will be delivered upon arrival." The transmission ended. The bridge returned to dim light and damaged consoles. The captain exhaled slowly. "That is not acquittal," he said. "No," Violara replied. "But it is not condemnation either." The human stepped beside her once more. "The Empire just learned something uncomfortable," he said softly. "And what is that?" she asked. "That power guided by choice is more stable than power driven by fear." Across the ship, word began spreading quietly among surviving crew. Not about her destruction. Not about her betrayal. But about her restraint. About the moment she stood free and did not turn on them. Empires change slowly. But they change first in whispers. And tonight, in damaged corridors filled with smoke and flickering lights, the first whisper had begun. The transport ship reached the Carthan capital system 3 cycles later. It did not arrive in triumph. It arrived scarred. Hull plates still blackened from Virex fire.
Emergency repairs visible along its sides like stitched wounds. News of the attack had already spread through the Empire.
Not officially,
but through secure channels. Through soldiers who had survived. Through officers who had watched the recordings more than once.
Violara stood at the main viewing deck as the capital world grew larger ahead.
A planet of silver towers and floating platforms. The center of an empire that had once called her weakness. The human stood beside her again. Not close enough to intrude. But close enough to remain. "You could still leave," he said quietly. "Your species has neutral territories beyond Imperial reach." She kept her eyes on the planet below. "If I leave," she said calmly, "they learn nothing." He did not argue. When the ship docked, the receiving chamber was not empty.
Rows of armored guards stood at attention. High Council representatives waited at the far end of the long metallic hall.
Civilians were not present.
This was not a public ceremony.
It was a controlled evaluation. Violara walked forward without chains. Without escort gripping her arms. The guards parted.
But not in fear. In caution.
The human followed several steps behind her.
Observing quietly. The council chamber doors opened slowly with a deep mechanical echo.
Inside, the circular hall felt colder than the prison ship ever had. Tall figures sat in elevated seats along the curved walls.
Watching her. Measuring her.
In the center of the chamber stood a single chair.
Metallic, unadorned.
Facing the council directly. A deliberate position.
Not a throne. Not a prisoner's stand.
But a place of judgment. Violara walked to it and stopped. She did not sit immediately. One counselor leaned forward slightly. "You were sentenced to isolation," he began. "You disobeyed direct military command."
"Yes," she replied evenly.
"You engaged enemy forces during transport."
"Yes." "You had opportunity to abandon the Empire."
"Yes."
"And yet you remained."
"Yes."
The chamber grew quiet again.
The silence stretched long enough to feel heavy. Another counselor activated a projection in the center of the room. The footage from the transport ship replayed in holographic detail. Her restraints breaking.
The Virex boarding teams advancing. The moment she could have unleashed devastation.
The moment she chose precision instead. The human's hand on her shoulder. The disruption of the Virex command network. The retreat of the war vessel.
The recording ended.
"You exercised restraint," the lead counselor said carefully.
"Yes," she answered. "Why?" he demanded.
Violara looked directly at them.
"Because strength without control is destruction," she said.
"And destruction without purpose weakens us all." Several council members shifted slightly in their elevated seats. Her words were not emotional. They were measured. Deliberate. The lead counselor glanced briefly toward the human standing near the chamber entrance.
"The human influence is evident," he said.
The human did not respond. He did not bow. He did not defend himself. He simply waited. Violara spoke before they could continue. "The human did not change my power," she said calmly.
"He reminded me that power is choice."
Another long silence followed. Finally, the lead counselor stood from his seat. "Your punishment is lifted," he declared. Gasps did not echo in the chamber. The council did not react dramatically. But the decision carried weight across the Empire. "You will not return to Fleet Command," the counselor continued. "But you will serve as strategic advisor in border defense.
A role requiring discipline. And cooperation."
Violara inclined her head slightly. "I accept," she said. The judgment complete, the council session ended without applause.
Without ceremony.
As she turned to leave, she noticed something subtle in the chamber's arrangement. Along the lower tier of seats reserved for advisors, one chair remained empty. positioned beside the one assigned to her new role. Later that day, the first advisory session began. Military officers filled their assigned positions. Tension lingered beneath formal posture. Vayalara entered the chamber calmly. Eyes followed her. Some still cautious. Some curious. She walked toward her designated seat and paused. The empty chair beside it remained unoccupied. Whispers moved quietly through the room. Would anyone sit there? Would it remain symbolic again? A reminder of isolation. The doors opened behind her with a soft mechanical sound. Footsteps echoed lightly across the polished floor. The human entered without announcement. No armor. No rank insignia. Only quiet presence. He walked directly to the empty chair. Stopped briefly beside her. Then sat down without asking permission. A faint wave of tension rippled through the advisors. But no one spoke. No one objected. Vayalara turned slightly toward him. You continue choosing dangerous seats, she said softly. He gave a small, almost amused nod. Someone has to, he replied. The session began. Strategic maps illuminated the center of the chamber. Discussions turned to border security. To Virex movements. To fleet coordination. Vayalara spoke with measured authority. Not dominating. Not withdrawn. Balanced. The human contributed when needed. Offering quiet insight into predator psychology. Into pattern analysis. Into unpredictability as defense. As the meeting progressed, something shifted in the room. The empty seat was no longer a warning. It was no longer punishment. It was partnership. Beyond the chamber walls, the Empire adjusted slowly to new information. Reports spread through military channels that the so-called traitor had saved a transport ship. That a human had stood beside her without fear. That cooperation had defeated a hidden threat. Change did not roar through the Empire. It moved quietly. Like gravity adjusting course. At the end of the session, as officers began to leave, Vayalara remained seated for a moment longer. Looking at the star map suspended above the chamber floor. You altered my sentence, she said quietly to the human. He shook his head gently. No, he replied. You altered it the moment you chose not to destroy. She considered that carefully. In the reflection of the glowing stars, she no longer saw isolation. She saw possibility. The most feared woman in the Empire had once been left alone as punishment. Now she sat beside someone who had chosen the seat no one dared take. And for the first time, the empty space beside her no longer meant exile. It meant strength shared.